It's been a long day, so I'm not going to make this too long. I've been to the Tall Ships event in Sunderland. Very worthwhile going to. I'm probably going to make a video about that tomorrow. So, excuse me for not going into great detail with this one. I want to talk about Trump's visit, but I'm not going to get into detail about any sort of negotiations or trade or anything like that because I think it's ongoing and we don't know yet what's going to be agreed exactly. Um, Rather, I just want to talk about the nature of the protests around this and specifically UK US relations regarding this president. A little bit of history. Obviously, the UK and the US have very long standing ties. Um, I don't need to give a history lesson for that, it's obvious. I think it's interesting that the relations are such that British prime ministers can actually joke about burning down the White House. There's very few countries where you would have such a casual nature of relations, whereby that could be the case. I think that is telling. Um, so it's interesting because before 1900, it was actually frowned upon for American presidents to make international visits anywhere, and there were very few international visits. In my city, in Sunderland, Ulysses S. Grant actually was in the presence of the opening of our local museum, but that was post presidency. That was when he was promoting his autobiography. Um, so this sort of special relationship in the sense of presidents and prime ministers can be seen going back to Churchill and Roosevelt, when of course it was very important as World War II allies. And I don't think there is any real comparison before that. I don't think Woodrow Wilson and David Lloyd George had the same sort of relationship. So, in that sense, the special relationship goes back to World War II and the various conferences around that, Yalta and Cairo and so on. Um, then that was continued with Harry Truman and Clement Attlee. And then later on, there was a very strong relationship between Harold Macmillan and John F. Kennedy. In fact, JFK cited Harold Macmillan as his closest confidant among world leaders. I have a book on Kennedy's letters, and quite a few of them are addressed to Macmillan. Very interesting. Later on, of course, there was the famous Reagan Thatcher relationship, and that might have been the strongest of any president prime minister, even more than Churchill Roosevelt. It wasn't without tensions. Thatcher was furious when the Americans invaded the Commonwealth nation of Grenada, but they patched up their differences. Reagan apologized to Thatcher over that. There was also some, let's say, the Americans weren't immediately on board with the Falkland situation, but nevertheless, Thatcher and Reagan had very strong relations, needless to say. Major and Bush Sr. continued that. And then Tony Blair with both Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. And the Clinton relationship was more natural because the Labour Party and the Democrats are sort of sister parties, broadly speaking. Um, Both Blair and Clinton were third way politicians. The New Democrats kind of paved the way for New Labour. So the ties with Bush Jr. were a lot less natural in a sense. I know the two men joked at first, "What do you have in common? We both use Colgate," I think was the line. But Tony Blair's philosophy was very much shaped by 9/11, and that was a very interesting relationship because they were very different leaders in a million different ways, and yet they formed a very close and, fair to say, controversial relationship. Certainly controversial on this side of the Atlantic. Cameron and Obama enjoyed pretty strong working relations. Now we come to May and Trump. Early on, Theresa May, unless I'm mistaken, was the first world leader to visit Donald Trump. And as I understand it, Trump wanted it to be a situation like his Reagan to her Thatcher, Well, Donald Trump is not Ronald Reagan, and Theresa May is not Margaret Thatcher. Both leaders have been in office. Today marks exactly 2 years since May has been in office, Trump less than 2 years. It's a matter of debate how long either will last. If we put a lifespan, May probably has less of a 10-year possibility than Trump. We don't know. That's speculation. But I think that it's important to recognize that Donald Trump is not a conventional American president. I mean, this is a man that he was an outsider. He was never meant to win, and he did. I think Theresa May is a pragmatist in that sense. I think she knew that, and she went straight in. Some Britons would say too fast to kind of reach out to Donald Trump. They would also say it was too fast for her to make an invitation, although it's taken 2 years for that to happen. Trump was meant to visit earlier this year, partly to visit the new embassy, but he didn't, on the grounds that he didn't think it was, he didn't approve of it. This attention is not actually a full state. This visit, excuse me, is not a full state visit, but it's got a lot of media attention. George W. Bush's visit back in 2003 also got a lot of attention. I remember when Tony Blair brought Bush to Sedgefield, which is his constituency, there was big protests around that. And certainly during the Vietnam War, there was animosity towards Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon later on. Now, in the whole tenure of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, there's only one president she hasn't met, that was Lyndon Johnson. And there's only two presidents who didn't visit the UK, Lyndon Johnson and Gerald Ford. Every president in the Queen's reign, with the exception of those two, has visited the UK. So if Trump didn't visit, that would be a bit unconventional. I have very mixed views about the protests. I would say there are certain Britons who I would say are so blinded by their hatred of the EU that they're willing to make a million different excuses for Donald Trump. What I would say to those people is, if your view is that the demonstrators are idiots and they're loony left and they should shut up, I would say go to a totalitarian state. Those people have a right to peacefully demonstrate, and overwhelmingly it has been peaceful. Now, I don't agree with everything they're saying, and certainly some of the placards I would take issue with. One woman, for example, held up a placard and it had two speech bubbles. One said, the truth, and the other said, things Donald Trump says. So the insinuation was nothing Trump says is true. Well, that's not true. That's misleading, because some of the things Trump says, whilst he's politically incorrect, is true. What he says about pan Islamism being violent and intolerant is absolutely true. What he says about MS-13 gang members being vicious is true. Having said that, Trump has also come out with a lot of factual inaccuracies. For a man who popularizes the idea of fake news, he's been pretty good at promoting some fake news himself. My issue with Trump is that whilst he reaches out to Kim Jong un and Vladimir Putin, he has no problem insulting Western allies. And I do not understand these hard Brexiteers who hate the EU and they're going out of their way to defend Trump, but they don't seem to care about the fact that even before this visit took place, he's insulting his host by saying, oh, it's a right mess over there, and basically calling Britain a failed state, whilst publicly saying it's going to be a lot easier dealing with Putin. I mean, this is an utter lack of diplomacy. And this is supposedly from the same man who, trumpets Brexit, interfering in our politics, promoting Brexit. It's one thing saying, I want to do a good deal with the British. It's quite another taking such a vocal position on such a divisive issue. I mean, Barack Obama might have said, Britain will go to the back of the queue. Incidentally, some suggest that David Cameron's team encouraged him to say that. Whether he did or not, I don't know. But looking at the two presidents, Obama stated his opinion when he was asked. Donald Trump pontificates his opinion when he's not asked. That's a difference. And I think his utter lack of diplomacy is a problem. This is a man who has publicly denigrated NATO, publicly denigrated the European Union, and what I would say is that only plays into the hands of Putin. I've nothing against Trump voicing concerns about NATO or the European Union, but to do that at a time when he's pandering to Putin, I think is really telling and more than a little concerning. You know, hard Brexiteers and hardline Trump supporters, they're very vocal about standing up to the establishment and doing two fingers to Brussels or to the Washington establishment, as they would put it, but they don't seem to give a damn about Russian influence in the West. And it is interesting that Russian bots have targeted not just the far left, but the nationalist right as well. That's something that the far left and the nationalist right have in common, whether they admit it or not. They're both being used by Russia. And to those people who hate the European Union and go out of their way to defend Trump, what I would say is I'm not accusing you of being a Russian troll, certainly not, but just be aware that you are playing into Putin's hands. That's what I believe. Now, as to some of these protests, the Trump blimp, this baby, has attracted a lot of attention. I've heard people say, "Oh, well, they should pay for the policing themselves." What you're basically saying with that is that only if you can afford it do you have the democratic right to peacefully protest. Actually, they crowdfunded for this, so they did raise the money themselves. Um, the police are trained to police large demonstrations, right? It's their job. They're paid to do it. I mean, what I would say to those people is, are you going to extend the same argument for, um, Brexiteer demonstrations? Or are you going to say, oh, they should pay for the police operation themselves? In a democracy, you accept the right of people to demonstrate whether you agree with them or not, so long as it's peaceful and so long as it isn't, so long as it's peaceful. So I think there's a bit of hypocrisy from some of the Trump apologists in the UK. I mean, they seem more interested in defending Trump than acknowledging that Trump has repeatedly insulted this country. When he said that, oh, look at the Brits, their healthcare system is terrible, they're protesting against their healthcare system. It's not that the NHS is above criticism, but that was a distortion because the junior doctors weren't protesting against the NHS. They were protesting about the handling of the NHS. Even Jeremy Hunt said that. When Donald Trump said that the victims of the Bataclan terror attack would have survived had they only got guns, that is a crass insult. So I don't understand British Trump apologists who seem blinded by their love of Trump. Now, I'll be fair to Trump. I'll defend him when the criticism is unfair. But without question, this is a president who has repeatedly thrown diplomacy out of the window in place of his crass, insulting tweets. And people who say that Donald Trump, I don't know if he's personally racist, but people who honestly try to claim that he hasn't pandered to some very ugly elements, they're deluded. This is a man who claimed he didn't know what the KKK was. Give me a break. Donald Trump has unquestionably pandered to racists. I'm not saying all of his policies are racist. I'm not saying I'm against all of his policies. But you really are deluded if you cannot see that Donald Trump has appealed to some very ugly elements. So I can understand people having strong views about Donald Trump. And if you're saying that they have no right to demonstrate, well, then nobody has a right to demonstrate. On the other hand, I would say to the demonstrators, do you hold the same animosity towards President Erdogan, who came here a few weeks ago? Now, Erdogan, the Turkish dictator, has locked up thousands of journalists, purged political opponents, exported violent nationalism overseas to Germany, to the Netherlands, to the United States for that matter. Why was there so little attention on Erdogan? Okay, maybe he's not as important as Trump, but Turkey's still an important country. It's not an insignificant player on the world stage. So I wonder why there was so little attention on Erdogan's visit. So summed up, I support their right to demonstrate. I don't agree with everything they're saying, and there's definitely some hypocritical, regressive leftists among them. People who, for example, would want open door immigration with no checks. That's stupid, and it's reckless. Um, and people who say, oh, if you criticize Islamist terrorism, you're an Islamophobe. Again, stupid. But they also do have some valid criticisms of Donald Trump. And I would say to the Trump supporters in the UK, by the way, a lot of the protesters are American. So this is by no means an anti American thing. I want to be very clear about that. Sadiq Khan made that point. Whether you like Sadiq Khan or not, he was right to raise the point that this is not, it's not anti American, it's anti Trump, and there is a difference. Donald Trump does not define America, he does not own America. So this is specifically about Donald Trump. It's not like people are burning the American flag or something. Anyway, that's how I feel about it. I support their right to demonstrate. I don't agree with everything they're saying, but I do understand some of the contentions against Donald Trump. On the other hand, they need to understand that we can't ignore the fact that Donald Trump is the democratically elected president of the United States. And in a post Brexit world, we need strong trade deals with the United States. I am happy with the fact that Theresa May has insisted that Trump take a hard line on Putin when he meets Putin regarding the Skripal case and Russian interference in the West. So fair play to her for pushing that because I think it's very important.